Good morning. I'd hate to guess how many people in British Columbia, or the Lower Mainland alone, are living in what are technically illegal suites. But I do know that with the housing crunch for rental apartments being what it is, that many people are becoming progressively more worried in case their particular municipality begins to clamp down and say, illegal suite, you don't have the proper clearance. And they go to the landlord, they lay a charge against them, they convict them, and eventually, one way or another, the tenant in the illegal suite, quite happy with the rate and the accommodation, can be forced out onto the street. To cover the broad problem this morning, I have Vancouver lawyer Jonathan Baker, who knows much about zoning and problems and hardship cases and illegal suites and legal suites. And we're going to be interviewing Jonathan on the second part of the program. For the first part of the program, we start this morning, however, a topical series on the Workers' Compensation Board. Hope to finish up with the chairman of the board discussing the matter with us in a few days' time. Tomorrow we're going to be talking to leaders of the IWA and the Council of Forest Industry. But for today, my reporter Brian Coxford has produced an interesting documentary on the work of the Compensation Board inspectors as far as safety and lack of it on occasions in the logging and sawmill industries in British Columbia. So first this morning, we'll go on location with Brian Coxford.
Surrounding the Workmen's Compensation Board, we thought the time was right to go on an inspection of the forest industry, because that's the area of concern. Last year, 47 deaths in the forest industry. This year to date, 40, most of those in logging. Assessments are up, medical costs up, pensions paid on fatal claims are up, and Workmen's Compensation Board inspections are down. First, on a straight-up tour with a Workmen's Compensation Board inspector to logging. Logging in BC is dangerous business. In fact, of all the industrial deaths, fatalities in the logging section of forestry account for nearly half. Last year, 47 men lost their lives in the forestry industry. 34 of those were in the woods in some form of logging. To date this year, the statistics are even more alarming. 40 people have died in BC's #1 industry, and the breakdown shows 33 of those deaths have occurred in the logging section: falling, bucking, and rigging. In many cases, the men killed in the woods are short on experience and very young, and falling is by far the most dangerous job. A faller may think he has an escape route planned, and the tree trunk will flip up and hit him. A sucker or hanging branch could fall from another tree, or the tree could suddenly roll over and crush the logger after it's been felled. Historically, fatals in the logging industry have represented up to a third of all industrial deaths. Yet 1 out of 50 workers in BC are in the logging business. Meet Chilliwack Workmen's Compensation Board Job Inspector Dan Nelson, the man who has to investigate those deaths.
That is the hazardous occupation. You could categorize that as being the most hazardous by far, yes.
What is it? Is it just fate, or is it carelessness?
Well, let's see, it's a more hazardous job in itself, because they are exposed to more hazards. We all know, as you could see, there's more hazardous more hazards there than there is anywhere else. Subsequently, the fallers have got to be more aware, and they've got to exercise more caution. I would say it takes more experience and training to be able to carry out a falling and bucking function without getting injured or killed.
Nelson's inspection on this day was at BC Forest Products Silver River Logging Camp, east of Harrison Lake, a camp that hasn't had a serious injury in almost 2 years. The country is rugged, and because of the vastness of it all, the WCB inspection could take up to 3 days. For Nelson, it's a constant attempt to educate the workers about safety, sometimes emphasizing the brutal aspects of the job.
Here are some of a few of the falling accidents. I don't have them all here, but that's occurred this year. Faller struck by a hung-up snag. That was in April '79. The faller had come up upon a pine snag measuring 60 centimeters in diameter at the butt. Small cedar snag measuring 20 centimeters in butt diameter and 12 meters in height was leaning against a large pine snag. The pine snag was felled into the open face, and as the tree fell, the small cedar snag struck the faller on the head. So, I mean, what do you contribute it to? It's quite evident, isn't it? See, that's why it's so important, planning and looking up and knowing what you're going to do ahead of time, and if there's a problem exists there, get some advice or some assistance. Here's a faller struck by a root. Now, this wasn't a fatality, but look what's the result of it. Paraplegic, so, you know, it's pretty serious. The worker was struck by a piece of root flipped up by the cedar tree had just felled. The faller had hesitated during his intended move away from the fallen tree. There again, you see, it's important to get away from there. You never can predict what's going to happen there at the bottom of that tree. Here's a faller killed, struck with a sucker. 10 fallers killed since, this was statistics in August the 27th. And here it shows 10, see? But 10 fallers, total of 32, counting all this in the various categories. But you can see the fallers are way above anybody else here.
Another possible killer in the woods is the failure on the part of the faller to properly put down a tree. If he misreads the way the tree should fall, the wind conditions, or improperly cuts the tree according to those conditions, there could be problems.
So if this tree had been more of a lean that way, and he was trying to put it against the lee, it would have ripped this right off, because there's nothing holding here. But as it was, there's where the stress was, and it pulled that out. That's why it pulled this out. So he could lose control by pulling the stump root like that. As it was leaning this way. That's why that's pulled like that. The changeover from the scaling days to the conventional system now of day work for fallers hasn't produced the results expected by any means. It was intended by many sources at that time that this would reduce some of the injuries and fatalities. But it really hasn't done that at all. Particularly so, I think, is because when the fallers were working on piecework, it was again a business for them. They had to go out there and they had to manage their job. They had to look over and they had to plan and they had to set up the day's work. If they were going to have problems with those saws stuck, wedging timber, falling against the lean, fighting all day long, they weren't making money. So a good faller at that time, and some of them were excellent, and there still are excellent fallers, but some of them made terrific money at that time. They planned their work because they weren't making money otherwise. They had to be efficient. And of course, when they carried out the planning and looking over the setting good and the layout and recognized their mistakes so that tomorrow they didn't make the same mistakes because they would be losing money, that was a safe way to do it. It always proves out that if the right way is a safe way to do it. And if a faller is efficient, he's doing a good job, it's seldom that you'll find that he'll get into trouble where he's going to injure himself or cause a hazard to anyone else.
Another aspect of logging where death and serious accidents occur with regularity is in the yarding and rigging of timber after an area has been cut by fallers. A typical example of an accident in this type of work occurred in another logging camp last June. A 16-year-old with 3 weeks on-the-job training was struck and killed by a choked tree. And in another logging camp, another youth with 8 days' experience on the job was killed in the same manner.
When your vision is blinded, stop everything and say, well, okay, we're going to, where is everybody? I can't see the load. We've got to make sure everybody's in the clear. You guys get out of the way and stay out of the way. Training is vitally important. Nobody can be expected to come out here and logging and know what to do right off the bat. Everybody has to be trained. Everybody has to get experience.
Who's falling down on that, do you think?
I think it's a combination of the operators and the workers themselves. Workers are not accepting their responsibility as well as the operators. What I mean by operators is logging operators.
This operation we're in, BC Forest Products, a good operation. They haven't had an accident that Workmen's Compensation has had a claim in over almost 2 years.
2 years.
Why can't that example be carried out throughout the whole industry?
I think you'll find a similar example in many of the other bigger operations that have an excellent record because they are working on it. You can see the effort that this operation here has put into it. It speaks for itself.
Can the board accept any blame at all in terms of perhaps not enforcing those regulations?
I don't think so. Every firm that goes into business, they know there are regulations. And it is up to them, without us coming around telling them what regulations they're violating or what infractions exist in the operation, where they're neglective. They have their own responsibility to comply with these regulations. And there's no way that they can relinquish this responsibility. That's to be understood by management as soon as they start to hire people.
Forestry is BC's largest business. It's also the #1 killer in industrial deaths. Next, we went to a sawmill. We didn't know where we were going until we showed up in the morning to meet the Workers' Compensation Board Inspector, Al Anderson. With him on this tour, Bill McMath of the company and union rep Jim White. It was January 18th this year in a mill in Fort Nelson where a 23-year-old man with 2 years' experience was caught up in a chain sprocket similar to this one and dragged to a horrible death. There have been 5 other deaths like that one in other mills in BC this year. This is McMillan Bodell's Canadian White Pine operation in South Vancouver. We are told it's one of the better examples in the province of a safety-conscious mill. And this is WCB Inspector Al Anderson on his way to inspect the sea mill operation.
Is that the proper speed? Okay. Well,
First stop on the sawmill inspection, as it is in every case, the first aid stand.
We have a sprained ankle last evening. Don't know yet whether it'll be a lost time or not.
have you got your records here? Have you got an accident record book, or do we have straight?
Yes.
Can I just take a quick reading on that? Any of these others that were near misses that are significant that we should be concerned with? Or?
There seems to be a rash of them in the finger area.
The high and low tides in the Fraser, the swift current, and the unpredictable nature of the work make this area of the sawmill a dangerous place to be. A worker has to have his wits about him. A logger could fall, hit his head, and be dragged under a log by the fast water, and it might be too late to help. Debris in the water, always a problem at any sawmill, and that presents the WCB inspectors with an ongoing concern. Debris trapped under the dock at high tide, a continual hazard for workers.
And, get it corrected, eh? This is an ongoing thing.
There was a tour through here yesterday, and this wasn't here apparently yesterday.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. It's an ongoing thing, but If we see it, let's get it corrected.
Side, all the sharp wood, the rest is pretty soft.
Better get this squared away, I guess, eh? Looks like they've had a brace across here that's broken off. You're going to get somebody to take care of this right off, eh?
When Al Anderson was here on an inspection the last time, he ordered the company to place screens or guards over some of the hazardous portions of the machinery. He notes on this visit, most of his orders from last time have been fulfilled.
So the idea of these guards is to, prevent that impulsive act. You notice here the full tail spool is guarded up.
And it's the hands that is the most common injury.
Well, yeah, but it's not only the hands that can draw you through. You can be drawn right through a tail spool like this. Wearing plugs now? Tell 'em. Well, this is one that we'll get a guard on, eh? Go about 40 inches or something like that. Same kind of a deal as you've done in there, and we've got it.
It's in this area where the logs are cut into lumber where many of the serious accidents can happen. A mistaken judgment or faulty piece of equipment will almost certainly mean a loss of limb or even death. The safety regulations here have to be followed to the letter. And there's also a danger with the extremely intense and steady noise. If a worker doesn't wear his hearing aids or ear covers, there could be a loss in hearing. Inspector Anderson measures the fence that is supposed to prevent the workers who walk along this catwalk from falling over and being crushed in the machinery below. It's too low. He'll write in his orders that he expects it to be raised by the time he makes another inspection. Another hazardous area, crosswalks between the cutting areas. If a worker is at all careless and doesn't look up before he crosses through the danger area, a big chunk of timber could whip by, either breaking or severing his leg.
Shouldn't be any problems in this area at all, eh? We ought to maybe do something with this, Bill, eh? Put another piece in here. You got a joist down there?
This crane operator tells the inspector that 2 months ago he'd asked the company to replace a light bulb in his work area. 2 months later, it's still burnt out.
How's it going? All is well, and any problems here at all?
Oh, I have problems in here because I talked to the bill. I want to see him, you know. over 2 months we got this two lights off, you know, big lights. Those are on, it's off a long time ago.
Okay, illumination at this point. Now, this is running on afternoon shift too, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, Bill. You've got it.
And the green chain area is another part of the sawmill under constant monitoring. Usually it's the part of the sawmill where the new and inexperienced workers start. After each inspection, the inspector, the company, and union reps compare notes.
I think we were ahead of you on that.
And the WCB issues orders. They expect those orders to be carried out immediately.
Thanks.
Al, what's your overall impression of this WCB inspection today at White Pine?
Well, I'm quite satisfied with what I've found, and in that there's been a great deal of work done in sawmill since the last time I was in here.
What kind of work? Screens or?
Well, with respect to guarding of tail drums and S drives and this type of thing. That's conveyor S drives.
Is that one of the largest areas of concern?
Well, yes, it is.
Hands, legs?
Yeah, hands, legs, and even lives.
You notice that in the statistics that point to any kind of accidents or any kind of deaths or anything, that there's few people in there, mixed in there, that have had very little time on the job, maybe 3 days, 3 weeks, maybe a month, maybe 4 months.
Well, I think when you're looking at workers being killed, and I think this is what you were referring to, with 1, 2, and 3 days experience, you have to question how well were they trained, and I think we do question, how good was the training under these conditions.
Just one perhaps a criticism, perhaps not, that I heard today was that sometimes there might be a danger of overprotecting. You have too many guardrails and a worker becomes sort of secure in the fact that he can almost go anywhere without getting hurt.
Well, I think, there's people that believe this, and I don't personally go along with it. I think the intent or their feeling is, well, if we really overprotect them, they're going to drop their own personal guard, and that is, being tuned in to their own self-preservation. But I think we've got to combine things. We've got to do the guarding that has to be done, and then also get people tuned into their own
combination of protection and education.
Protection and education. That sounds pretty valid. You bet.
The accidents and the increased number of deaths in the forestry industry is the subject of concern in all circles. To date this year, there have been 83 industrial deaths in BC. Of that total, 40, nearly half, have been killed while working in the forestry industry. It's meant that the Workmen's Compensation Board has had to increase its forestry assessments, up $5.4 million in the last year, and an alarming $18 million in the past 2 years. Pensions paid on fatal claims in all industries, almost half of those in forestry, have gone up $2.5 million in the last year. And medical aid, hospital bills, and treatment in all industries. Again, much of that the result of accidents in the forestry industry, up $3.1 million. With all those increased costs and everyone blaming everyone else for the alarming rise in accidents and deaths, the number of Workmen's Compensation Board inspections between 1977 and 78 actually went down 8,800 industry-wide. The unions ask why.
That last piece you gave me, Brian, on that excellent report does cause me to ask you, inspections down 8,000 odd. Is there a specific reason that you've yet come up with?
Well, if you talk to the union, the IWA, the principal union involved in this, they say that it's a lack of intent, I guess, on the part of the Workers' Compensation Board, that they're just slacking off. But if you talk to the board itself, they say the reason for that is what they've done is they've eliminated some of the inspections on the flower shops and the candy shops and concentrated on longer inspections in the high-intensity industries.
Well, it seems we started this series at the right time. Who are we having on tomorrow?
Coffee, Council of Forest Industries, Don Lanscale, and the IWA President Jack Monroe.
Jack Monroe. We haven't quite finalized the deal yet for a senior official from the Workers' Compensation Board, but we're hoping for that perhaps for Friday, eh?
That would be Dr. Little, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, dokie. Well, thanks, Brian. That's the first segment of our look at the forest industry and the Workers' Compensation Board in general. I'll be back after the break on illegal sweets with Jonathan Baker, Vancouver lawyer. Two items whetted my interest on this problem of illegal sweets, and hopefully they will whet yours. First of all, there's the crunch and the tiny, tiny rental vacancy there is on the Lower Mainland. And we had Mr. Battison, the rentals man, on about that the other day. And then secondly, I'm beginning to get anguished calls from worried people, new word. I got a particular letter from one woman who is very happy, living at what seemed to me a very large rent, 300 and something a month, in a suite in a fourplex on the Lower Mainland. The only trouble is it's not zoned as a fourplex, it's zoned as a duplex. But there are 4 families finished living in this particular unit. And there are a number of similar units in that particular area. And the woman says to me, what if there is a prosecution for an illegal suite? Where am I going to go with my family? We're in the neighborhood we like, we go to the schools we want, we're happy with the accommodation, it's clean, modern, and she said reasonably priced. So I decided to ask my friend Jonathan Baker, expert in zoning, expert in civic affairs as a matter of fact, and who deals with the problem of developers and landlords and tenants in these suites. Is there need for panic on people in illegal suites? Or can I put it to you this way, Mr. Baker? Do the authorities, by and large, in the lower mainland municipalities, and perhaps throughout the rest of British Columbia, the Nelson touch, the blind eye, don't let's bother. Illegal suites are all right and people should not worry.
Well, it depends on the municipality. I think Vancouver has a reasonably civilized approach. What they have been doing is not prosecuting unless a complaint is received by them from a neighbor. If they do give an owner or a tenant an order to close down the suite, there is a procedure for appeal on the basis of hardship. And among the things they will look at is financial hardship. Both the landlord and tenant can appeal to City Council, first to a hardship committee of civil servants and then to Council. And Council generally will permit the suite.
Now, really, I'm so much out of touch, I must start at the very beginning. An illegal suite is what? A suite which is built in contravention of health bylaws, zoning bylaws, or both?
Well, it can be both, but it's primarily zoning bylaw. If the area is zoned for single-family dwellings, and there's that means one dwelling unit in the building, and if it has 2 separate units, then it's an illegal suite, provided that it's not occupied by members of the family of the main unit.
So there's the first exemption. I may have a separate suite in Vancouver in an RS1 zone if it's for mother, father, brother, sister?
That's right.
Uncle, aunt, cousin?
Yeah, and you can also have lodgers in a house. You can have up to, I think it's up to 3 lodgers. This varies from municipality to municipality. But as long as they're they don't have a separate kitchen, they live in their household, that's an exception also.
But it's a separate kitchen and the non-related family members renting a portion, which makes it an illegal suite.
That's it, yeah.
Now,
Now, incidentally, I should go further. It may well be that there's a contravention of the building code if someone has made an addition to their house without having applied for the necessary permits.
Oh, well, doesn't everyone do that in parts of Vancouver, really?
It
to
has-
help pay the mortgages?
It has, apply for permits or build illegal suites?
Or build illegal suites without necessarily applying for permits?
Well, there's a lot of that goes on, but people do it at their peril, and they can get in real trouble.
Or you can apply for a permit to have your basement done up as a suite, and then slip in 220 wiring for an additional stove. Is that right?
That's what people will do.
That's what people do. But see, in cases like the university area in Vancouver, is not the supply of illegal suites or near illegal suites absolutely essential to accommodate university students?
Yes, it is. It's the cost of these units are low, and I don't think it adversely affects the amenity of the area. I think people like to have them. They like to have students in the house with them. The rents are reasonable, and there aren't very many complaints.
In other words, if you have the students as a lodger, you're absolutely clean and free.
Yeah.
If you have them in a separate illegal suite with a stove, for which you have not, it's only zoned RS1, you are operating an illegal suite.
Yeah, you may be, and you may be, if a neighbor complains, you may have to launch
Are
the
there
hardship
many
bill.
complaints in Vancouver about illegal suites as such, causing, I presume the complaints are on the basis that they cause some kind of social nuisance or bring down the value of the property?
There are some. I don't think they're a great number, but really the main complaint is parking. The density of the neighborhood goes up, and then there's a lot of cars on the street, and people don't like that. I think that's the main concern.
All right, now dealing with Vancouver specifically as we are at the moment, you said that I can go to a hardship committee of civil service.
That's right.
But I can't go to them on an economic basis, can I?
Oh yeah, you certainly can. I handled one recently, for example, where the tenants were both on welfare and both senior citizens, and they had to be in a unit that was in ground floor because they couldn't walk upstairs. And the rent was low. It was, I think, $150 a month. And these people launched a hardship appeal and were granted a hardship exemption.
So that these hardship exemptions completely wipe out the total intent of the original RS1 or the illegality of the accommodation?
I don't think it totally wipes it out. I think that when any law is stringently enforced, by the book, it's the equivalent of a labor union working to rule. The system breaks down. If you stringently enforce zoning or any other municipal bylaw and allow no exceptions, the law is made to look like an ass. And Vancouver, quite reasonably, is trying to avoid that. There's a recognition that these suites form an important function.
But yet, on the other hand, you take the case of, say, a guy who's running 4 people to a unit. A duplex turned into a quadruplex, which is not difficult to do. Surely that upsets the total planning done by, say, an intelligent municipality for the amount of people in that area and schools and the parks and all the rest of it.
Well,
I'm talking about a number of them.
Sure. You can't make a general rule neighborhood by neighborhood. The problem with quadruplex, if you take a duplex neighborhood and you go to a quadruplex, it will effectively double the density, and in Burnaby worked out some figures, from 8 units per acre to 16 units per acre. And this can get higher than areas that are zoned apartments. On the other hand, in other neighborhoods where you have large, old single-family dwellings with nice gardens and large lots, I think it would be better to allow those buildings to be quadruplexed than to allow them to be demolished and 2 duplexes put up side by side. That way you still increase the density, but you lose all the open space. So it really depends on the character of the neighborhood.
I suppose so. The duplexes to quadruplexes would be the toughest example of an instant expansion against all the facilities available.
Yeah, it is. But I have a feeling that the municipalities are overreacting for a couple of reasons. First of all, there's a drop in population in the size of families. Vancouver, for example, we know the problem of declining enrollment. There just aren't enough children to go around to fill schools. Family size is dropping. So by quadruplexing, I doubt that you're really increasing the number of people in the neighborhood that much. again, I think that you probably are increasing the number of cars, and that's the thing that upsets everybody.
More with Jonathan Baker on zoning and illegal suites, and when I get around to talking to you about your problems, maybe I'm making a mountain out of a molehill. Do you think so?
Well, it depends whether you're in a legal suite or have one.
Well, I'm not in one. I don't have one. Webster and Jonathan Baker after the break. I'm going to take some phone calls on general illegal suite problems. We're not going to give you specific advice, but we can perhaps help you to understand your particular problem with Jonathan Baker. You were saying that. Is there any idea how many illegal suites there are?
Yeah, in Burnaby, they did a study in 1977, and they figured that there was some 3,000, I think 3,200 illegal suites out of a total of 28,000 units.
So that's about 12%.
Well, the figure was 13%.
13%?
Yeah.
Vancouver?
Vancouver, I don't know.
Thousands of them.
There's a lot of them.
Yeah, but generally speaking, therefore, if I were asking you for advice, if I live in an illegal suite which is an established illegal suite, and of which there have been no neighbour complaints, do I have anything to fear of my landlord being harassed or myself being evicted?
Yes, you do.
Oh.
It can, what, in Vancouver, did you say?
Yeah, or even Burnaby, just generally speaking.
Yeah, you can, first of all, in Burnaby it's different. I think they are cracking down, and they have an inspector going around finding suites and prosecuting. Vancouver, what may happen is an inspector may come through a building for some other purpose. Maybe they're going to rewire a house or do something in the house, and the owner will call for an inspection, and the inspector will find the suite. And it seems that sometimes they will then put the thing into the mill.
In other words, if it's turned up in a routine inspection, it may go into the mill.
It may go into the mill.
Burnaby, I know, has a housing inspector who is presently inspecting quadruplexes, which are supposed to be duplexes, and charges may follow in some or none of these cases. I don't particularly know about that. But therefore you say there is a danger. Have you ever heard of anyone actually being evicted from a suite when it has been judged to be illegal?
I haven't, none of my clients have. I don't know of...
So therefore, if you appeal to your local council and put the heat on enough with legitimate problems, they're almost bound to back away and bend the rules not to evict you, or is that too broad a decision?
I don't know what the general policy is of the city. I believe that in Vancouver, I'm told by members of council that when people get before city council, they're generally left alone once they launch that appeal.
Once they launch that particular appeal. So therefore the basic hedge is, if you're not an obnoxious, noisy, illegal tenant or stupid landlord who jams all the parking in the neighbourhood, you're liable to be left alone.
I think so.
With the housing crunch, would it not be reasonable, and you have a broad experience as, I forget, were you a planner?
Yeah, I was with the social planning department.
That's right, social planning department. Social planning makes you a planner.
Right. Yeah.
Is now not the time, because of the housing crunch and the cost, that perhaps all suitable accommodation should be zoned for an additional suite where hygienically possible, or possible from a health point of view?
Well, the trouble with actually legalizing suites...
I suppose that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, if you legalize suites and then require that they come fully up to code, the suites become very expensive. The fact is these suites are often substandard, and substandard means they may be terrific suites. They may be much nicer than a new condominium, but they don't. The wiring may not fully comply. It might be in an old house. The number of things might just not be up to code. If you have to spend a lot of money jazzing up the suite, then it's going to cost a lot.
In other words, if you took the kind of broad approach that I was suggesting and say, okay, anyone, anywhere can put in an additional suite, you'd have to conform to all the current standards, and you might wipe out many suites.
That's right. Not only that, but one of the reasons that suites are so necessary right now with high interest rates is that homeowners who now have to renegotiate their mortgages have an enormous amount to pay. And so they're creating these suites or continuing to rent suites to cover their mortgage payments. If they have to spend a lot of money upgrading the suite, thousands of dollars, that purpose is defeated.
too.
But it's a matter of policy for each municipality and for each neighborhood. Some neighborhoods it may just be inappropriate to have illegal suites, period.
Yeah. A real snobby neighborhood.
Perhaps, but the people just won't want it. If the people in a neighborhood just don't want it, as far as real snobby neighborhoods are concerned, those are the ones that probably most need it. People find they can't afford to live in those great big houses that are expensive to heat.
Did I mention Shaughnessy with its old protective acts? Does it still have a protective act?
Sure.
Shaughnessy.
Sure.
But it's full of illegal suites.
Well, the city planning department has come up with a new Shaughnessy plan, they worked with the Property Owners Association. And I think the effect of that will be to allow the creation of additional suites in buildings.
And those are the kind of homes, big lavish homes, which perhaps updated a little bit, can produce half a dozen good suites with lots of airspace around them.
That's right, and the community would have to decide what is more important, to maintain the concept of single-family dwellings and therefore to allow the demolition of these beautiful old houses and put up places on small lots, and lose all the open space, or to allow multiple families to start coming into the big old houses.
Which would you go for?
I would go for increasing the density, allowing the families to move into the old houses.
The old houses. I'd hate to see the city covered with apartments and condominiums every which bleeding way.
Well, you know, we always think of these problems as though we're the first time in history to ever have faced it, but Louis Mumford's book on the city and history describes how the beautiful European cities of the Middle Ages were destroyed when they basically filled in the gardens. In Vancouver, the zoning bylaw in Vancouver, we talk of infill housing. And infill housing is basically to allow someone to put a house up in their backyard or on the side of the lot. And that's considered sort of a terrific thing. But in the Middle Ages, as the density increased, the towns that were planned with beautiful squares and gardens suddenly found those gardens filled up with infill housing. I think it's better to allow the number of people in an existing house to go up.
If for one reason only, I'm glad you're here this morning, because now I know what infill housing means. It means still the grass, still the trees, still the gardens, and jam little houses in any available green space.
Yeah, that's basically.
We're against that.
Well,
we'd rather increase the use of the existing property to its maximum degree.
I think that it's better, but again, you can't make a general rule.
No.
In Shaughnessy, I would, I think the policy is different than perhaps somewhere else, Kitsilano.
Fair enough. We're going to take calls on illegal suites, or legal suites, or problems thereof, or therefore, or henceforth, to Jonathan Baker after the break. Pamela, you let my coffee get cold. What do you want? Give me a small cup, love, will you? Give me a smaller cup.
They hired some jerk to redraft the Vancouver zoning bylaw. What he did, he simply renumbered all the provisions so you can't find
Listen, before I forget, Jonathan, would you guide me for a couple of good programs on education at the school board?
That would be fun.
Okay.
Yeah. This testing program would be.
What was wrong?
Would be fun.
What was wrong with the audio?
Absolutely hate us, and so do the parents. We implemented American tests.
It was okay on my headset. I could hear the program
being
okay.
culturally biased and.
Who would I use for that? You and who else?
Me. For the other side.
Yeah. Davinsky?
No,
the
the
union.
other side. Someone from the union.
Secondary teachers.
Camera one. Good morning, Ricky.
I can't remember it. I'll think of it. Hanson.
You're lit up like a Christmas tree.
How is Davinsky doing? Quite
Well, I think he's doing okay. Yeah, I think he's doing
likely guy.
Yeah.
5 seconds, Jack. They're all good
Oh,
calls.
and your coffee's hot.
It's all.
You're hungover again. I muffed the most important question of all because it's been raised a couple of times. What is the right, Jonathan Baker, of an inspector to walk into my house in my municipality or city at any time and say, I want in to look at this, that, and the next thing?
Well, actually, that's a very interesting question. In Vancouver, the zoning bylaw provides that an inspector can come in at virtually any time, I think any reasonable time, and inspect. And the power to do that comes from the Vancouver Charter, specifically for zoning. With all other municipalities that are governed by the Municipal Act, they seem to have omitted the provision relating to the right to inspect from the zoning section. At least I don't know where it is. I haven't seen it. It may be there. I know building inspectors have a power of barging in, but I don't know that people inspecting under zoning have that right. So that would be an interesting question, should it arise.
If the inspector comes to your door, you could say to him quite legitimately, what authority do you have? Show me your authority to enter this house and examine it for the purpose of zoning.
Yeah, and he would say the zoning bylaw. Now, a further constitutional question would be whether or not it's in fact a search, and I'm not a criminal lawyer, but is this in fact a search, and does the power to do that come under the criminal code, or is it a provincial or federal responsibility? Anyway, that can come up in the appropriate case, and I've never had
Interesting, because every time anything comes up in front of provincially written legislation, it is invariably ruled, as you people say, ultra vires, unconstitutional.
I wish it was invariably ruled.
Outside the law. Well, the
yeah.
Family Relations Act is the Heroin Treatment Act is another one, two that come quickly to mind.
Well, it's very common in municipal law for things to be ultra vires because often the bylaws are drafted by the planners, who rather than by the lawyers.
By the lawyers.
Yeah.
And the regional districts are on a caper just now, which I saw in the local paper on Salt Spring Island, the Driftwood, saying that they're giving them those power to come in and make sure that you've got certain kinds of locks on your bathroom doors that can be opened from the outside. Is that the caper?
Well, I wasn't aware of that. I assume the time will come when the health inspectors can check under your nails before you eat.
Oh, I have no doubt about it. Well, we're going to the calls to Jonathan Baker. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'd like to ask you guest this morning, what would the city do with all the people that's in illegal trade if they were to chase them out on the street tomorrow? Or is it fair for city of Vancouver to chase children out on the street?
Now, you haven't been listening too closely, has he, Jonathan? Now, just a moment, now, before we get off on the wrong track. He's fearful that everybody's going to be thrown out. Could you reassure him?
Well, the city of Vancouver, the reason he's fearful is that the city of Vancouver was considering clamping down on illegal suites, and I think and throwing everybody out, and they've decided not to do that.
Oh, my mistake, caller. They were actually close to that kind of a decision.
From what I read in the newspapers, they were close to that kind of decision, and I think they decided not to take that.
That would be politically stupid, wouldn't it? As well as socially undesirable.
Well, I don't know if it would be politically stupid. I assume that there are a lot of people who are against illegal suites, just as there are people who live in them or own them or for them, and people who don't have them or live next to them may or may not be against them.
Yeah, you're taking.
They have to count the votes.
Anyway, what would happen, Jonathan, if they were all thrown out in the streets? We'd have a housing crisis.
They would all move. If they did it in Vancouver, I guess they'd move to Burnaby, or they'd end up in more expensive condominium units that they'd have to rent. Or
have we still got thousands of those things unsold?
I think there are a fair number.
Fair number. Thank you, sir. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack. I want to thank you so much for doing this program. I hope you're going to do some more in the future. I live in Burnaby, and the situation is different than Vancouver. Our program is not tempered with common sense, mercy, or anything else. They're doing a house-to-house, block-by-block research. Last Monday night at City Council, it came out they had 1,700 inspections. And there have been a lot of prosecutions, and as fast as they find people, they turf them out. There's no, hardship provisions. The only thing is they might give you 2 months to move or...
Are you sure?
Yes, I am sure. Believe me, I am sure.
Are you affected by this, ma'am?
No, I'm not. I do not have an illegal suite, a duplex, or anything like that. But I've read some of the background material that planning has presented to council to... when they wanted the inspector and to give the inspector more powers and so forth. And believe it or not, they're going on a 1974 or 75 guesstimate of around 4,000 suites. Well, I bet there's twice that many. They don't know how many, and yet they're busy turfing everybody out. And I just don't think if they succeed in their ambition that it's possible to find homes for all these people.
Well, I'm surprised by this call, Jonathan, because normally I'd be getting calls on the air or off the air about people being actually evicted. The procedure of evicting a tenant after a landlord has been prosecuted is still lengthy and slow, is it not, Jonathan?
Well, they can, doesn't have to be. They can move fairly quickly. No, it doesn't have to be slow. If they want to do it fast, they can
do it. Well, thanks, ma'am. I'll maybe make a specific inquiry about the situation in Burnaby.
Yeah, one of the things they do, you see, instead of the tenant isn't very involved in this situation. They put the onus on the landlord. They prosecute the landlord. Some landlords have been to court 2 or 3 times because their tenants couldn't find homes and so on. I really wish you would do a specific thing on Burnaby, because I can just see untold hardship before council comes to it.
And that raises a point with Jonathan.
Well, yeah, I question as to whether what Burnaby's doing is all that bright. Being concerned about illegal suites, they're now proposing to amend their zoning bylaw. And what they do, for example, with respect to single-family dwellings, I think they would make it, they would count basements as a story. The result of that is that people who don't want illegal suites, who simply have a house and have a basement, or want to build a house with a basement and use it for storage or use it for playing space, for their kids to set up their electric trains, won't be able to do it. It'll result in reducing the size of houses and eliminating amenities from building.
Is this a new zoning bylaw?
Well, there's a report of October 31st that went to council in Burnaby, and it suggested a number of revisions to definitions of various things.
Which would affect the construction of future homes in Burnaby.
Yeah, and this is all to make it very difficult for people to either duplex their house or put in illegal suites.
Thanks,
I think there are other ways of doing
I'll
it.
follow that up.
That particular one was referred back to the Housing Committee. It went so far as to suggest that you are allowed 4 foster children in a single-family dwelling only, would you believe?
That's right.
They seem to have gone slightly off the nuts. I'll get a copy of that report of October the 13th.
I have copies of all of these things, Jack. I'd be glad to get them to you.
Thank you, ma'am. Please do. Webster and Jonathan Baker, after the break. Mr. Baker has the Burnaby report with him. Just try and tell me again what the object of changing the zoning bylaw in Burnaby is in relation to suites.
Well, the object of the changes is to make it very difficult to put in to put up a building without a suite, and then after it's finished to sneak the suite into it. That's normally done by a house with an unfinished basement, and you get a permit for a single-family dwelling, say, and then you finish the basement.
Why don't they just...
So they say no basements. No, that's, I think, ridiculous.
Why don't they just say, if you put one in, we'll prosecute you?
That's what they ought to do. They ought to define, what they should do is say that for single-family dwellings you can have 1 unit, and for duplex areas you have 2 units, and then you define a unit, and then if they want to inspect, they send their inspector around, and he looks and finds a unit and says...
But they're redrawing this zoning bylaw to make it physically impossible to build a house which can take a second suite in it.
Yeah, they're trying to reduce the size of a house. Here's what they've done, for example. Definition of story. A basement shall be considered as a story. And this results of if a basement is a story and you're only allowed to have 2 stories, then you end up with a smaller house.
You mean you can't build a basement and 2 floors above it for a single-family unit?
Well, if the particular bylaw has a story limitation that you can only build 3 stories or 2 stories, whatever it is, if you count the basement as a story, you've effectively eliminated a lot of space.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
What's going on in Burnaby? Go ahead, please.
Yes, I live in Richmond, and I've just bought a duplex which has 2 illegal suites in it. It's a huge building. It has 11 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, and the municipality issued the building permit. They knew that it was going to be used as a 4-plex. It meets all the fire standards, and I think that there should be some differentiation between buildings with substandard suites and buildings that do meet all standards and do have adequate parking in Richmond. And I also would like to say that as I've just bought this, the rent does not meet the mortgage payments by $301 a month, plus the taxes are $154 a month, which my husband and I are subsidizing living accommodation for 4 families. And I think that this should be recognized as not being something...
As not being illegal. Now, has anything happened to you, ma'am?
I don't take possession until the 3rd of January, but I do not expect anything to happen because Richmond is full of accommodation like this. They simply haven't recognized it as being legal or right.
Very well put, man. 11 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, building permit issued by Richmond, 4 families accommodated in it, and all the rest of it. Right. That's a piece of, what, municipal hypocrisy.
Well, in any event, the purchaser takes something like that at their peril. The municipality is not barred from enforcing its zoning bylaw or building bylaws if it wants to. And as long as the purchaser is aware of that, there may not be any real risk. I don't know what the policy in Richmond is, but someone who buys an illegal suite may have to suffer the consequences.
Ma'am?
Prosecute if there are complaints from the neighbors, but I don't expect any.
Because your neighbors are all doing the same thing.
No, as a matter of fact, they're not, but there's only one neighbor, and he built the unit.
Oh, thank you very much, ma'am. From Fernie, BC, go ahead to Webster and Jonathan Baker.
From Vernon.
Oh, Vernon. I thought you said Fernie.
Oh, good morning, Mr. Webster.
Morning.
I'm not sure whether Mr. Baker can help or not. It's not truly in regard to the illegal suite business, but we are 4 families in a quadruplex unit in Vernon. And in the last month, the building has been foreclosed upon, and we are having problems as far as making arrangements to move. And the vacancy rate here is about 1%. And at this time of the year, there's a pregnant woman involved and a family and this type of thing. I was wondering if I could get some assistance in possibly what we could do from here. Rentlesman has said that it's a court thing and that they can't be involved, and we have to pay to get to the courts.
What do you mean you have to pay to get to the courts?
Well, if we want to fight this...
Well, you're not a party to the action on the foreclosure, obviously.
No.
It's your landlord who's being foreclosed on.
Right, and the foreclosure went through at the end of October.
And is there a date for the foreclosure to take effect?
Well, we've got all the papers that went through on the foreclosure, and that was as of the 25th of October.
Has anybody told you when you have to get out?
The end of this month.
The end of November.
Right.
Lawyer Baker.
Well, there's not much advice I could give without knowing more facts.
The fact remains it's in the hands of the courts to decide when vacant possession will be given?
That's right, and it sounds like they're going to have to look for other accommodation.
It does. Have you been to the person who is foreclosing?
Yes, we had contact first on the 7th of November stating that we would have to move because new owners were buying the premises.
But what about the new owners? When do they want the place?
As far as I know, I don't know if there's new owners at all. We've also, in looking into it, have found out that it's for insurance purposes that we have to vacate, and then it's going to turn around, be their property, and then they'll have to rent it again. So it's a matter of getting us out to get insurance.
Well, if I were you, I'd get in touch with your MLA and get him to scream and shout and stamp his tiny feet. Who is it up there?
Pat Jordan, and we can't get hold of her. We're going down to her office this morning with an up-to-date report on what we've got.
Pat Jordan. Will some friend of Pat Jordan please ask Pat's constituency person to call? What's your name, ma'am?
Joyce Thorbergson.
And what's your phone number, Joyce?
545-9732.
Say it again. Say it again.
545.
545.
97.
32.
Right.
Don't take it that I'm a supporter of the Social Credit Party merely because I'm doing Pat Jordan's work for her. Would one of her staff please call Joyce at 545-9732 and give all possible aid and comfort?
Okay,
and she'll get the message, I'll guarantee you, within 5 minutes from now.
Okay.
She'll know by 10:15 this morning.
Great.
Thank you very much. Webster and Jonathan Baker. We do these little things to help people and embarrass others. After the break. Graphic shop in Gastown.
Ernie Fliddell.
Yeah, what's Ernie doing? From Sook, S-O-O-K-E, British Columbia. Go ahead.
Yes, Jack. You were mentioning something about the building code in the capital region.
Yeah.
Well, it's being cancelled out. The capital region got themselves into a real bite on that, and you were right about locking the locks on your bathroom doors. They'd have padded trails down to your house. I imagine your property has got a long walk to your property.
Yeah.
But it is a fact, all right. This law is in effect in other areas, but it's with if you want to make renovations or
This was the powers of the inspector, wasn't it?
This was for the federal government to lend you money if you want to make alterations, etc., to your house.
They've wiped it out.
They wiped it out, but I would caution you, they still are looking at some areas in that bylaw, in that building code.
Much obliged. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I just opened an illegal suite in the Lougheed Mall area, and I was very surprised to find that I had people practically begging me to take the suite. I had about 25 calls on it.
How much are you charging?
I'm charging $225, which I thought at first might have been a little bit too expensive, but people were practically begging me to take it at that price.
And why did I mean, you just built it without a permit, did you?
Without a permit, no.
No permit?
No permit at all, no.
Well, sure. The answer the municipalities would all have is that obviously anyone who doesn't build to code could create cheap units. Why should let's say Dayon, for example, Dayon, when they create condominiums, are required to go to all the expense of complying with all building codes. They could also offer very cheap units.
If they didn't have to comply with the codes.
Yeah, so to what extent are you going to allow everybody to ignore the code?
Agreed, there must be some control, but this man's experience shows one illegal suite, one ad, 25 people queuing up to grab it.
Yeah, well, it also suggests that we may well be, it's trite to say, but over-regulated, and standards may be too high, and maybe it just costs too much to build and to finance.
Best of luck, sir. I hope they never catch you. Even though you are in Burnaby, and they have a housing inspector on the prowl.
Well, I think this is crazy.
He's got a big magnifying glass at his eye.
He's disguising his voice. It's actually a woman calling.
It's a woman calling, and he wears a Sherlock Holmes cap. You'll recognize the housing inspector.
He's Scotch?
No, he's not Scotch. No, he wouldn't get Scotchmen to do that. They make the illegal suites. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Webster, I'd like to talk to Mr. Baker on regards to not only illegal suites, but housing, where the landlord rents a house to, say, two young men, and then in moves about 2 or 3 others, and then they have these wild parties, and you cannot do anything about it. The parking is like you said, too many cars. And also, the upkeep, they do not keep the house.
Ma'am, you're really not on the topic at all. Surely this is a matter entirely for the rentalsman.
This is a thing that's happening to people, and landlords should be prosecuted.
Ma'am, I agreed entirely, but you're not on our topic. You should have called when Patterson was on.
Right. She is on your topic. She's the lady. She no doubt is the lady next door who is going to complain. And
I do apologize, caller, and to you, Jonathan.
I understand, Mr. Webster, but
sure, she's going to complain because, and that's exactly what happens.
Get a petition to be able to quieten these boys down, because this house has not only been in trouble once, it's been in trouble 3 different times.
Are they in an illegal suite?
They have an illegal suite downstairs, and they have some upstairs. And also, they don't, the place is a filthy mess, and the last time we got a petition from the neighbors around here, and we got a man from the city hall to do something about it, which he did do. The police were there, and they said the place was in appalling condition.
Which town are we talking about?
Vancouver, 4th Avenue.
4th Avenue?
Yes, Kitsilano. And still now, they've quietened down, but it's still in a filthy condition, and I think they should get after landlords like that. But they don't seem to. He seems to get away with it because he's a professor at university, and he seems to con these people, and then we have the same old trouble again. They were supposed to get out, they went to the renters man. We got the petition, and they went to the renters man, and they're still there.
He's a tenured professor, no doubt, at UBC too.
Yes, he is, and he owns several other houses.
Well, why don't you get Harry Rankin on his back?
I've had Mr. Rankin on him once before, when we had a barking dog, and you name it.
Harry's the best barking dog in town, I'll tell you.
I agree with you, he is very good, but you know, he might get fed up listening to my name and...
Ma'am, you made a very good point indeed, and as such you should go up with the City Council as a delegation with all your friends, and if you scream and shout to the entire City Council some chosen afternoon or evening, you will get service. Is that not correct?
Well, that's right. They'll get the inspectors out.
That's the way to do it.
Sure, they'll be streaming through the building like lice.
It's filthy, I tell you.
Thank you, ma'am. But that is the point. I had almost missed that. I thought that was just another rentalsman query, but
Yeah. No, that's the other side of the story.
that's a classic illegal suite pest.
Sure.
Glad we did this program. Go ahead, please.
Jack and Jonathan, I'm phoning in regards to a friend and his wife. They just bought a one-year-old house and with a basement suite in it in North Vancouver, in the district. And he and his wife are both working and require the rent from their suite to make the mortgage payments. The only problem is that it's a single-family dwelling, and about 3 months ago, a bylaw inspector told them that his tenant must leave. Now, he's in a spot where he's got to pay for his mortgage, and he can't figure out anybody in the neighborhood that would complain, and there's...
Just a minute. What is do you know the regulation? Do you know how they handle them in North Van, Jonathan?
No, I don't know how they handle them. I'm aware of the regulation in North Van is similar to
No, but I
Burnaby.
mean the hardship business.
I don't know if they have a hardship policy. I don't know that.
Well, they should have, shouldn't they?
Well, perhaps.
Has he been to city council?
No, he hasn't.
Well, tell him to get off his butt.
Yeah, well, they haven't, they told him twice now, and...
The thing to do is to go up to City Hall, see the mayor. Who's the mayor of North Vancouver? Don Bell. Good guy. Tell him Webster sent you and say, what's the policy?
Well, I was in an illegal suite myself at one time, and I got evicted in the city of North Vancouver. So, and they...
Well, anyway, tell him to go see the mayor.
I don't know. I think my advice is the same advice you give people when they're in the Army, to basically don't go to the front of the line, don't go to the back of the line, stay in the middle, and hold your breath. There's a certain danger in, without knowing what North Vancouver's policy is, of a person simply bringing attention to the problem. Maybe if they have Webster on their side, it'll work okay.
Sometimes helps, but you're right. In other words, don't volunteer.
Don't volunteer.
Just ignore the letter. Just keep a low profile until something crushing is about to happen, and then leap into action.
That's perhaps right.
Best advice. Okay. Webster and Jonathan Baker. You get two different types of advice here. Loudmouth and the sane man. After the break. Where am I going, Linda? Go ahead, please.
Hello there, Jack. I've got a two-part question. I guess they're both for Jonathan. The first one is, the problem is, I also live in Richmond, and what am I saying?
Do pull yourself together, even if you do live in Richmond.
Also listen to TV, I think I'll turn it off. The other problem I've got is, most of the...
We know your first problem. Now come to the second problem.
Yeah, as I say, I live in Richmond, and we have problems with the racial discrimination right now, and this is one of the problems we got. The other thing that really upsets me is that the people that do live in Richmond and are also living in illegal suites aren't paying the proper taxes that everybody else is paying.
Now, there you have a point. We'll ignore all your other garbage, and we'll get down to the fact that those who are creating big revenues from, say, a fourplex and a duplex zone are really getting away with a bit of financial murder, are they not?
Well, actually, when the value of the property when it's sold probably reflects the fact that there was an illegal suite, and so it's going for a higher price. And the tax assessment, since it's based ultimately on the actual value and sale price, means that there is a...
It'll balance out.
Yeah, it's being taxed.
If I've got one of these huge things in Richmond with 11 bedrooms and 6 bathrooms and 10 children and 18 adults in it, I'll be paying the appropriate amount of assessment.
Well, if the property hasn't sold for a long time, if it's the same owner's had it for 40 years, and therefore nobody knows that there are illegal suites in it, so that the estimated value is just as an ordinary big mansion that's drafty, maybe not. But
if it's one of the new ones.
Or if it's an old one that's changed hands, so that the value reflects the income from these suites, that the city will get its tax revenue.
Thank you. Victoria, go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Morning.
Dear Mr. Baker. I have had experience with my grandson, a university student, being thrown out of an illegal suite.
In Victoria?
Yeah. No, in Vancouver.
Recently?
Last year.
Why? Because he was a bad tenant?
I don't think so. He's an honor student. He moved out of the dormitory for his first year, so he gets some studying done.
Does that surprise you, Jonathan?
Yes, it does. I haven't...
He does not have a car.
Well, there must have been another reason, ma'am.
Well, I don't know, except whether it was an objection for the neighbors. I just don't.
Well, it probably would be. Again, typically, it would be an objection from the neighbors. Right across the street from me, as a matter of fact, there's a house with a big picture window, and in the window it says, to whom it may concern, this is a single-family dwelling area. Now, one interesting thing about it is that this guy is violating the sign bylaw, but obviously he's someone who doesn't like illegal suites. This is near the university, and...
It's east of Dunbar and near...
Hold on, ma'am, that's good. You mean in his picture window he's got a notice?
Great big sign, yeah, saying this is a single-family dwelling area. And that would violate the sign bylaw, but he doesn't like saying, you know...
So therefore he's trying to discourage illegal suites?
Yeah, from one of his neighbors, no doubt.
It's not you, I trust.
No.
The case was taken to the hardship committee, is that what you call it?
And did he win it or lose it?
Well, he lost it. But I don't know whether it was the hardship on the...
Landlord or on him. I'm sorry, ma'am, I can't really judge it without knowing more. Go ahead from Victoria again. The whole of Victoria is watching. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Webster.
Morning.
You had a woman just a few calls back, and she almost said the same thing I was going to say. I'm for the investigation, really, whether it be Victoria or Fernie or Vancouver, because a lot of people put in illegal suites, and they charge exorbitant prices, and they're really not proper. Some of them have not got proper toilet facilities, and in a sense, they're really protecting the poor income people and forcing the landlords to really update the places or put the people out and find other accommodation. There are cases that are just deplorable, and people on low incomes look for these places, and it's a pathetic situation. So on one hand, certainly people are being hurt, but I think in the long run, they're being protected. And I think the real estates, too, should be involved in this. I think perhaps they're selling homes and saying that it's illegal, but you can have an apartment in it.
Well, here's the extent to which they're being protected. If you have a pensioner on an income of $300 a month, he may choose to spend $100 a month on rent and eat reasonable food for the rest of the month, or you can make him pay $250 a month and put him on dog food for as far as his meals is concerned. So, you know, the government is making that choice for him, and I would just as soon see the guy have the choice to make, whether he wants to have cheap, substandard accommodation and a decent meal.
And enough money to food. My thanks to Jonathan Baker, Vancouver lawyer, for being a mine of information on the general problem of illegal and legal suites in the Lower Mainland. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks.
Let's have you back as a school trustee one of these days on this testing caper you were telling me about.
About our American tests.
About your American tests in Vancouver schools after the break. 0835.
Hi, Steve. Checking my little mic.
No?
Tom Hansen and Jonathan on the American test.
Hi, Steve.
We'll do that.
Hello, Steve. Morning, Steve.
Again, Industries. Linda, tomorrow, we started the compensation thing this morning. Tomorrow we have...
We have Jack Monroe from the IWA and also Mr. Don Landskill from Council of Forest Industries.
What else we got tomorrow? Is that all?
That's it at the moment, yeah.
Is that all?
Maybe something else.
No singing and dancing?
Not that we know of.
I can always sing and dance if I have to. As I keep saying, we can do anything on this program given enough time and enough panic to fill.
Yes.
But the one on the Workers' Compensation Board will be good tomorrow with both Landskill and Jack Monroe, both of them outspoken, well-informed men on the particular problems of the forest industry. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. precisely.